Pentagon halts deployments to Poland and Germany to cut troop numbers in Europe, AP sources say. Add AP News as your preferred source to see more of our stories on Google. Add AP News on Google. Add AP News as your preferred source to see more of our stories on Google. Share Washington Act. The Pentagon is drawing down thousands of troops in Europe by canceling deployments to Poland and Germany as opposed to yanking forces already stationed there. U.S. officials say as President Donald Trump has tussled with allies over the Iran war and called for changes. Several U.S. officials confirmed that 4,000 troops from the Army's 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team, 1st Cavalry Division, were no longer en route to Poland this week. The Trump administration had previously said it was cutting U.S. forces only in Germany, and the decision spurred questions and criticism in both Warsaw and Washington. Two officials told the Associated Press the Poland deployment was cancelled after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth signed a memo directing the Joint Chiefs of Staff to move a brigade combat team out of Europe. One of them said the choice of which unit was left to military leaders. Besides the Army combat team based in Fort Hood, Texas, the memo also led to the cancellation of an upcoming deployment to Germany of a battalion trained in firing long-range rockets and missiles, according to the two officials, who, like the others, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive military operations. 3 U.S. officials said the canceled deployments were part of an effort to comply with a presidential order issued at the beginning of May to reduce the number of troops in Europe by about 5,000. The reasoning does not appear to have been well communicated, because others based in Europe said they did not know if the halted deployment to Poland was part of the previously announced reduction in troops. Read more. Trump and the Pentagon have said in recent weeks that they were drawing down at least 5,000 troops in Germany after Chancellor Friedrich Merz said the U.S. was being humiliated by the Iranian leadership and criticized what he called a lack of strategy in the war. The drawdown reflects a growing rift between the administration and traditional European allies, with the U.S. leader repeatedly criticizing fellow NATO members for a lack of support for the Iran conflict. Polish officials on Friday insisted that the canceled U.S. deployment to Poland, which was reported earlier by the Military Times and other outlets, was not targeted directly at their country, but was a consequence of Trump's decision to reduce the number of troops in Germany. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said he received assurances that the decision was of a logistical nature and said it does not directly impact deterrence capabilities and Poland's security. Military says the decision to cancel a unit heading to Poland was made recently. Joel Valdez, a Pentagon spokesman, said the decision to withdraw troops follows a comprehensive, multi-layered process, and he argued that it was not an unexpected, last-minute decision. Speaking to Congress in a hearing Friday, Army Secretary Dan Driscoll and Gen. Christopher Lanieve, the Army's Chief of Staff, said discussions around the halted deployment to Poland occurred over the past 2 weeks, but that the decision itself was made in the past couple days. Republican Rep. Don Bacon of Nebraska said he spoke with Polish officials Thursday, and they were blindsided. The move also left some U.S. military personnel in Europe in the dark about how the Trump administration was reducing forces. A U.S. official based in Europe said a meeting was called with 20 minutes' notice on Monday to discuss the cancellation of the deployment to Poland. At that time, troops had already been sent to Poland, and some still in the U.S. were told shortly before departure not to travel to the airport, that officials said. Another official said most of the Army unit's equipment had already made it to Europe and was sitting in ports. The change to troop deployment to Poland draws bipartisan criticism. Democratic and Republican lawmakers criticized the reductions as sending the wrong signal both to allies and Russian President Vladimir Putin, whose forces this week have launched one of the deadliest attacks on the Ukrainian capital in the 4-year-old war. At the House Armed Services Committee hearing Friday, Lanieve said he worked with U.S. Jim Alexis Grinkiewicz, commander in Europe of both American and NATO forces, after Grinkiewicz received the instructions for the force reduction. I've worked with him in close consultation of what that force unit would be, and it made the most sense for that brigade to not do its deployment in theater, Lanieve said. Bacon called the decision reprehensible and said it was an embarrassment to our country what we just did to Poland. Republican Rep. Mike Rogers of Alabama, who chairs the committee, said the military is required to consult with lawmakers, and that did not happen. So we don't know what's going on here, Rogers said. But I can just tell you we're not happy with what's being talked about, a State Department official said Friday at a security conference in Tallinn, Estonia, that the U.S. reductions in Europe were right there in black and white, but also noted that the U.S. isn't going anywhere. We'll continue to work with the Pentagon and work with our partners to make sure we get the right fit and right mix of what's happening here on the ground, said Thomas G. Dinano, U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security. NATO says the change in Poland won't affect defense with the halted deployments. The U.S. military presence in Europe will now be at pre-2022 levels, before Russia commenced its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, one U.S. official said. Europe has been bracing for a reduction since Trump returned to the White House, with the administration warning that Europe would have to look after its own security, including Ukraine's, in the future. A NATO official said the U.S. decision to cancel its rotational deployment to Poland would not impact NATO deterrence and defense plans. Canada and Germany have increased their presence on the alliance's eastern flank, which contributes to NATO overall strength, the official said, insisting on anonymity in line with NATO regulations. Ben Hodges, former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe, said the move reinforces the perception that the United States just does things without consultation with allies, which ultimately damages cohesion inside the alliance. The decision would in the long run harm the U.S. defense industry as it reduces the trust of partners, he said. Around 10,000 U.S. troops are typically stationed in Poland, the majority of them present in the country on a rotational basis. Only about 300 troops are permanently stationed in the country,